Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss an update on the war in Ukraine, as a number of reliable commentators have been providing some very useful insights in recent weeks. Essentially, we're looking at a long-term campaign here, which is exactly what Russia wants, and the geopolitics are absolutely crucial and part of the reason why we cannot expect more exciting progress next year than might otherwise have been the case. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So where are we with Ukraine? It's interesting because the expert commentators are all really clear that there's lots going on. You know, there was a lot going on last month, for example, but it's way more interesting for those experts than the layman because the results are less obvious, which is why there's been less emphasis in the mainstream media. But Ukraine needs to keep people engaged. One of the big successes for Ukraine has been President Zelensky's skill at forming international alliances, but he's now facing problems because the longer this war drags on, the more he has to be mindful of fatigue amongst allies who aren't fully seized of the consequences of failure for their own countries. Obviously, the stakes are highest for Ukraine itself, but the West will pay a heavy price if we don't take this seriously enough and see it through. You'd think we'd have already learned the lesson. You know, if we'd supported Ukraine in 2014, it would have been easy and cheap to do so. None of this would now be happening. But if we lose interest and try for a quick bodge job to get it over, we can still make the situation way worse in the coming decade. So last week, President Biden, after his visit to Israel, said, and I quote, "So we will stand firmly with Israel as we continue to support Ukraine." Now, over in Europe, that could easily look like Biden's trying to liken the situation in the Middle East with the situation in Ukraine. Hang on a minute, people are saying. Ukraine was attacked by Russia with not a hint of provocation, and the war crimes and human rights abuses are entirely one-sided. Indeed. But Biden was not drawing this comparison in order to make the situation in Israel seem like that in Ukraine. The view of both conflicts from America is very different to in Europe. Biden said what he said to boost support for Ukraine. Israel can already count on the very one-sided support of the United States. Ukraine cannot. Republicans particularly have been chuntering about support for Ukraine for a while. Trump is in the pocket of Putin. The prospect of Trump or any other Republican winning the presidency next year doesn't bear thinking about. But even in the here and now, support fatigue in America is a serious problem. Biden understands the importance of the war in Ukraine, but his concerns are not universally shared across American politics. Right now, Ukraine has an issue with munitions. According to an article supported by a lot of knowledgeable commentators that I've been following, Ukraine has essentially been getting by on existing stockpiles from allies, but they're going to run out. They need an increase in manufacture of munitions specifically for them, for this conflict. Ukraine is working on establishing its own production with allies, and European countries are doing likewise, but it is slower than we would like. These things do not happen overnight. America, however, is not showing signs that it is up for the protracted campaign here. Biden is not the king of America. He cannot provide Ukraine with the support they need without impressing upon other strands of government the importance of sticking with it. Russia, of course, is planning on dragging this out as long as possible. Its attempted blitzkrieg was badly messed up, but they can't just withdraw because that would be humiliating. So their plan is to dig in and wait until the West, and by the West I mean America, gets bored, you know, like it did in Afghanistan. There's also the issue of Russian elections next year. Yes, the democratic process is a sick joke, not the least of which because Putin simply imprisons anyone who builds up enough public appeal to challenge him. But he still needs to have enough of the Russian people on side, so you would think he'll want to present some sort of win next year, and the elections are in March. We also know that Russia, unlike Ukraine, is prepared to take ridiculous losses in order to earn largely symbolic victories. It's been a feature of Russian military campaigns for centuries, really. Just keep throwing young men into the meat grinder until you overwhelm your enemy. The suggestion is that if Russia launches another mass mobilization of recruits, then it's clearly planning on a major offensive somewhere. Russia also has a steady production of munitions going on, so they won't have concerns about stockpiles. assuming, of course, Ukraine don't keep blowing them up. Ukraine does have some boons expected in 2024. They are expecting to have a viable air force. The arrival of F-16s that Zelensky has been so desperate for, that gives it the capacity to launch more attacks in Crimea. Now, it's been noted before that the ability to do this gives Ukraine the ability to cause Russia headaches. Because on the one hand, Russia needs to be able to not just hold on to its existing stolen territory, but really show signs of progress. That means taking new towns. On the other hand, Crimea is their Achilles heel because it's like the part of Ukraine that Russians really genuinely fully believe is Russia. Like the rest of it, I think they sort of know is a conquest, right? But Crimea, it's like, oh no, that is actually Russia as far as they're concerned. The thought of losing it or even seeing it under threat would be impossible. So credible threats against Crimean territory will be taken much more seriously by Russia, meaning they may have to overcommit resources into defending it in order to prevent embarrassing defeats being reported in Russia. So if Ukraine can keep the pressure on Crimea, they may reduce the capacity which Russia has to launch offensives elsewhere. You know, the big political battle in 2024, as laid out in the article I'll link in the description below, is that Ukraine, from a military point of view, wants to keep a lid on things next year in order to wait for those supply lines of munitions to be built up ahead of serious offensives in 2025. So they sort of want to keep things on an even keel for next year. But the longer this drags on, the more likely some Western governments, with the US being the biggest risk, will want to cut a deal. You know, it's like they'll look at it as if nothing really happens in 2024, they may imagine, well, this is going to go all quagmire on us. It's just going to stretch out forever. Therefore, we need to have a different way of bringing this to a conclusion. Now, being clear, this is madness. Putin has a long history of using peace deals as a way of holding on to whatever he has, building up his strength before attacking again. You know, like people keep saying that to Putin, the word ceasefire means reload. You'd have to be an idiot to think that any deal with Russia with their current government is worth anything. Besides, such a deal would still mean allowing Russia to keep Ukrainian land, and remember, it's not just the land that matters, it's the people. Also means going soft on the pursuit of war crimes, and as always, it means taking the path of least resistance now to store up a much bigger headache in future. It would be utterly moronic. But, you know, have you seen the sort of people that get voted into positions of power? So it is a serious worry. Ukraine ideally needs to tread a fine line here. It needs to show signs that it might be close to victory, that this isn't going to stretch on for another 10 years, that it may be close to military victory in order to maintain support, but without overcommitting itself when its supply chains of new munitions are not yet established. So in terms of what we might see in 2024, I think I could summarise it as follows. First, Ukraine is waiting on the realisation of reliable supply chains of new munitions. This is not going to be ready for next year. So their serious offensives will need to begin in 2025. Second, politicians in various important allied countries, for various reasons, are looking for excuses to draw back their support, change what they view as the end game, which should be the full withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine. This means that Ukraine needs to work even harder in 2024 to boost flagging support in some quarters. Third, in order to boost that support, Ukraine may need some newsworthy wins without doing something stupid before their supply chains are ready. Fourth, Russia may need some symbolic wins of its own to coincide with the elections next spring. And fifth, Ukraine is expecting a boost to its air capacity, which might allow them to put pressure on targets in Crimea. That could force Russia to focus more on defence than attack. And then finally, we could say, just as with every big war in history, you know, you always get told, oh, this will be over quickly, be over by Christmas. But then it always lasts way longer. But the answer to that is not get bored and try and cut deals with bad faith actors. I hold in my hand a piece of paper. How did that go? But to do the job properly. As they say, you can either do a job quickly or you can do it right. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.